Over the course of a century, Zorro's stories have captivated us through books, films, and television screens. But behind that mask and rapier lies a treasure trove of crazy facts, unknown trivia, forgotten milestones, and surprising twists. In our video today, we're going to uncover them all and explore how a masked vigilante ruled the hearts of millions around the world with just an iconic slash of Z. So grab your snack and enjoy thrilling 30 insane facts about Zorro and get a full grasp on how deep the legend of this masked hero truly goes. But before we get into our facts, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This might just be a small click for you, but for us, it means an awful lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Number 1. The story behind the first Zorro. In 1919, Johnston McCulley penned an incredible tale of a mysterious masked vigilante known as Zorro, and he published it in the popular pulp magazine All Story as a 5-part serial. That very year, a beloved superstar of silent movies co-founded a film production company, United Artists, with many other well-known superstars including Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and director D.W. Griffith, with the aim to gain the distribution rights of their own movies without the interference of external agents. They also started this company to enjoy the creative freedom to choose bolder, more interesting, and ambitious projects as well. With this vision in mind, the superstar we were talking about was searching for his next fresh story. Luckily, he happened to read Zorro by McCulley on his way to Europe for his honeymoon. He was so moved by the exciting narrative of the swashbuckling hero that he instantly decided to co-produce it under the banner of his newfound company. The superstar that we're talking about was none other than Douglas Fairbanks, and that's the tale of how Zorro reached from the pages of a magazine to the big screen. Apart from being the producer, Fairbanks went on to become the first Zorro on the big screen. His charisma and screen presence gave the character a new dimension and aura. When the movie was released in 1920, Zorro's death-defying stunts, charming smile, and the iconic Z carving fascinated the audience's minds. The movie went on to become a grand hit, opening new doors for swashbuckling heroes for future projects, and most importantly, setting a gold standard for cinematic adventure. Number 2. The major inspiration behind the creation of an iconic superhero. In 1939, Bill Finger and Bob Kane created some buzz in the comic world when they introduced a brand new character who possessed an interesting set of abilities and weapons that the readers found cool and interesting. As a result, that character would go on to become one of the most legendary superheroes of all time. But before everything happened, Bill and Bob were struggling to find the right source of inspiration to bring their character to life. They were delving deeply into various materials for their source of inspiration until they stumbled upon the iconic movie, The Mark of Zorro. The duo watched the film and were mesmerized by the heroics of Zorro. They liked Zorro and the entire setting so much that they drew important characteristics from Zorro as their source of inspiration and incorporated them into their new comic character. And boom, the Batman was born. If anyone has doubts regarding this claim, they can follow Bill and Bob's subsequent interviews where they clearly stated the major influence of Zorro in creating the overall character sketch for Batman. As if that weren't enough, you can also find strong evidence of Zorro's influence on Batman's origin story as well, where you remember Bruce as a young kid walking out of a theater with his parents before they were killed by a gunman? The movie that Bruce and his parents were at was The Mark of Zorro, the talkie version, which was released in 1940, which we'll discuss a little later. Not only that, but after Bruce's parents died, the movie and the heroics of Zorro still remained fresh in Bruce's mind and soul, which later helped him to develop a sense of justice and transform him into Batman. Number 3. The real meaning behind the name. If you get an opportunity to name your favorite hero or main character after an animal, there is a high possibility that most of the time you'll name it after the animal that's the biggest, loudest, and strongest. There's nothing wrong with that, but McCulley thought in a different way. Out of all his choices, he picked the name Zorro for his main character, which literally means fox in Spanish. But why a fox? See, it's true that a fox isn't the most fearsome animal, but you might have forgotten that it is one of the smartest, and it can easily use its agility, slyness, and trickster spirit to dance around hunters and escape from traps that were specifically designed to catch it. So, back in 1919, when McCulley envisioned the hero of his work, He didn't imagine someone charging into danger with brute force, the trait we see with many modern-day heroes. Instead, he wanted someone to attack his enemies with cleverness, elegance, and quick thinking, just like a fox. So, McCulley fixed the name of his hero as Zorro, and with popularity, the name soon became synonymous with qualities such as cleverness, quick thinking, resourcefulness, and being a step ahead. Number 4. From real to real. For this fact, we'd like to introduce to you two individuals, Joaquin Murrieta Carrillo and Salomon Pico. Born in 1829, Joaquin Murrieta Carrillo was a cowboy and a gold miner from Sonora. Initially, he was a peace-loving person, but later turned his path towards violence when he and his brother were falsely accused of a crime. As per their punishment, his brother was hanged till death while he was horsewhipped. And if that wasn't enough, his young wife was raped, and after a while she died. For revenge, Murrieta became a bandit and killed all those men who were responsible for his wife's death. But Murrieta's story didn't end there. He saved countless people from the torments of their oppressors and became popularly known as the Robin Hood of El Dorado. However, in the eyes of the government, he was just an outlaw, and they often announced hefty rewards in public to convince the people to sell him out. Our next individual, Salomon Pico, was born in 1821, and like Murrieta, he was a bandit. However, his situation was somewhat different. After the Mexican-American War, California was added to the United States, and its demographics changed overnight. Just like other Californians, Pico had lost his land and status. These losses forced Pico to turn to a life of banditry to stand up for his own rights. He started attacking the American travelers and miners. The government saw him as a dangerous threat, while the locals hailed him as a hero who fought for his homeland. But why are we talking about these two historical figures? Because you might be surprised to learn that both Murrieta and Pico were inspirations that McCulley took to craft the character of Zorro and shape his moral code. Number 5. The origin story behind the iconic Z-Mark. From the previous fact, you already know that McCulley always deep dived into the real-world tales of masked vigilantes and rebels for the development of his lead character. But while studying them, he also discovered that their stories weren't always about their actions and sword fights. Sometimes those tales revolved around the unique signature marks they left behind as a symbol of their heroics and bravery. This compelled McCulley to include a dramatic signature for Zorro as well, one that would not only instill fear in the hearts of corrupt officials and cruel soldiers, but also solidify his position as a figure of larger-than-life status. And that's how the legendary Zorro Z signature came into existence. Zorro's Z-mark on walls, doors, and even clothing was not only a few quick slashes from his rapier, but also a strong reminder to the oppressors that someone was there to fight back against their atrocities. Not only that, the signature also acted as a beacon of hope for peasants, farmers, and all the other townsfolk who were exploited under the tyrannical rule. Number 6. Selecting the perfect backdrop behind the setting. To deliver Zorro's full potential as a vigilante and a messenger of justice, McCulley sought to create a world governed by evil officials who ruled with an iron fist and extracted blood from the poor without fear of consequences. As a result of that preference, McCulley chose 1769 to 1821 Spanish California as the setting for the adventures of Zorro. That's because, during that time period, Spanish California wasn't a part of the US, and the natives were facing atrocities from the colonial rule. Apart from that, choosing Spanish California also allowed McCulley to show a constant contrast between rich and poor, adding another exciting layer to the overall heroic narrative of Zorro. Number 7. Banderas' fencing lessons. In 1998, Hollywood decided to bring the legendary masked hero back to the big screen with The Mask of Zorro. For the role of Zorro, the makers wanted to rope in someone who could carry the same charm, agility, and skill set as previous actors. Their search finally ended with Antonio Banderas. Prior to Zorro, Banderas worked on movies such as 1993's Philadelphia, 1994's Interview with the Vampire, 1995's Assassins, and 1996's Evita. But The Mask of Zorro was going to be a different challenge for his career. Banderas took the challenge very seriously and and he became the new face of Zorro and was equally responsible for reintroducing the world of Zorro to a new generation. For starters, Banderas underwent intense fencing lessons and stunt training to give the action sequences a real and thrilling treatment. He also worked hard with fight choreographers and sword masters. He didn't just memorize the fight moves, instead, he laser-focused himself on mastering the intricate techniques of swordplay to fill in the legendary reputation of Zorro. Legendary English Olympic fencer and film fight choreographer Bob Anderson hailed Antonio Banderas as the most gifted swordsman he had ever worked with. As a reward for his efforts, the film became a late 90s blockbuster, and Banderas' action set pieces featuring contemporary humor and fun won the hearts of the audience. The critics also liked the movie, even though the plot was predictable. However, they genuinely appreciated the sincerity and sheer joy it brought to the overall storytelling of the classic hero. Number 8. The Daring Banderas. For the next fact, we're sticking with our boy Antonio, as he was once again cast as Zorro in 2005's The Legend of Zorro. Just as before, Banderas wanted to push himself beyond his boundaries to make the character larger than life. So what did he do this time? Well, since it was the second installment of the modern franchise, the makers decided to add action sequences with much higher stakes than before. However, the stakes skyrocketed when Banderas chose to perform his own stunts. At first glance, it might not seem like a challenge, as he did the same for the previous movie, but in 2005, Banderas was in his 40s, and performing continuous stunts could have compromised his health and made him prone to injuries. But Banderas' unwavering commitment to maintaining the authenticity of the character's heroism didn't allow him to walk away from the action set pieces just like that. From daring leaps to intense sword fights, Banderas did it all with pure perfection to make Zorro feel like a real hero leaping off the screen. Not only that, even Zorro's iconic black mask was adapted to meet the demands of modern filmmaking. Zorro's mask was carefully treated with special anti-glare coating to avoid distracting light bouncing off its surface during intense sword fights. This simple touch maintained the sleek and mysterious look of the mask even under the light. The crew also ensured the safety of the actor and left no stone unturned to support his efforts to make Zorro's character feel alive. Number 9. The real story behind the famous sword glint. In The Mask of Zorro, there's an iconic scene where Zorro draws his sword to fight against Captain Love, and the sun perfectly flashes on his polished blade, making the scene look like something straight out of a fantasy land. When the audience saw it for the first time, they assumed it to be a trick with some special effects, but you'll be surprised to learn that, in reality, that sword glint was actually not CGI, but a well-planned and executed arrangement of quite a few things. Yes, the makers thought to add a few authentic touches before Zorro took on the antagonist of the movie, Captain Love, so they included the sword glint before the fight and were adamant about not using digital gimmicks, as that could have lessened the authenticity of the universe. So what was the solution? To add the sword glint effect, the makers first coordinated with the fight choreographers and camera crew members to determine the positioning of the sword during the scene so that it would catch the sunlight at the exact angle and moment to create the striking flash. Even Banderas was briefed on how to tilt the sword to catch the light without breaking eye contact with Matt Lesher, the actor who played the role of Captain Love. The scene was completed in 3 takes. And then, as you know, everyone's effort paid off and the viewers witnessed a scene that symbolized Zorro's skill, elegance, and charisma. Even today, audiences revisit that scene not to see metal catching the sun, but to see the spirit of a hero whose single move could leave even his enemies breathless. Number 10. Entry into history. In the 1980s, many prominent filmmakers and industry figures, such as Frank Capra and Martin Scorsese, called on members of Congress to protect classic films from commercial alterations, including pan and scan, editing for television, and most importantly, to curb the controversial practice of colorizing black and white movies. Responding to the concerns, the main leaders of Congress introduced the National Film Preservation Act in 1988, which directly created the National Film Registry. The National Film Registry categorically selects movies that are deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant for preservation. To date, almost 900 movies have been added to the National Film Registry. But why are we suddenly talking about the registry in our video? Well, you might not know that among those 900 movies, The Mark of Zorro, from both the 20s and 40s, has been inducted. 1920's The Mark of Zorro was inducted in 2015, while the 1940s released film was inducted in 2009. Both films were added to the list as they began a new era for swashbuckling heroes on the big screen and helped this unique genre achieve global reach. Number 11. Changes in the character arc of Bernardo. If you've watched the 1957 Disney TV series Zorro, you might be familiar with Bernardo, the deaf and mute servant of Zorro. If not, no worries, we're here to help familiarize you with the character. Bernardo was not only a loyal servant to Zorro and his family, but also acted as his secret agent and sidekick in many of his adventures. Bernardo was really mute, but he pretended to be deaf so that others could speak freely in front of him, sharing their secrets, plans, schemes, and other important details that they would never reveal to anyone. Later, Bernardo gathered all this information and quietly helped Zorro to stay a step ahead of his enemies. However, very few people who are aware of the original novel will know that in the original source material, Bernardo was actually deaf and mute. But why did the writers of the Disney TV series add such a twist to the character's original representation from the book? At first glance, it might seem like a minor change, but making Bernardo pretend to be deaf added an unexpected layer to the character and highlighted the strong trust between him and Zorro, all without communicating a single word. The after effects of such an innovative and creative choice resulted in a rise in the character's popularity to such a degree that it influenced later adaptations, proving that sometimes saying nothing can be the most powerful move. Number 12. An unusual feat. The two-time Oscar-winning actor Sir Anthony Hopkins had a splendid career filled with memorable roles and characters. However, many are unaware that Hopkins remained the only actor to have played both the character Zorro and his mentor in the same film, a unique feat in the Zorro cinematic universe. Prior to Zorro, Hopkins had already cemented his place as an actor known for intense dramatic roles. When the makers of The Mask of Zorro approached him for the dual role, he refused it due to his back pain, but after a laser operation, Hopkins became a part of the project, ready to shine his potential in action-driven movies too. He played the role of Don Diego de la Vega, the real Zorro, with passion and charisma, and the role of mentor to the next Zorro, Alejandro Murrieta, played by Antonio Banderas, with dignity and seasoned wisdom. And then, as you know, the movie became a blockbuster. Even though the role of Don Diego isn't the most highly rated in Hopkins' filmography, it's still a fan favorite. Number 13. The Rise of Catherine Zeta-Jones. The makers of The Mask of Zorro were searching for an actress who could easily bring out the grace, elegance, and fiery spark of Elena, the rebellious daughter of the first Zorro, Don Diego. Their search ended with Catherine Zeta-Jones, who was finalized to play the role of Elena on the big screen. It was a big opportunity for Catherine, as she had only acted in a few movies and TV shows before. But nobody knew that Hollywood was about to witness a storm. She beautifully portrayed the romantic interest of Banderas with style, grace, humor, and fiery sword-fighting skills that matched the film's adventurous tone. Her face-off against Alejandro became a memorable scene from the movie because the sparks flew from both their swords, highlighting their undeniable chemistry. After the success of The Mask of Zorro, Jones earned critical acclaim for her work and became a global star. Her newfound success helped her secure important roles in movies like 2000's Traffic and 2002's Chicago, for which she received an Oscar in the supporting actress category, as well as 2004's Ocean 12. But it all started with Elena, which transformed Zeta-Jones' life forever from an unknown individual to a global powerhouse, indeed proving the fact that not only Zorro, but other characters from the movie can also steal the spotlight and be immortal in fans' memories. Number 14. The most loyal companion of Zorro. A hero is someone whom we imagine to be strong and powerful, someone who could take on the world on their own. But even that strong and powerful hero needs a loyal companion to stand with them and face the enemies head-on, pulling them from many compromising situations whenever they need it. In Zorro's case, that loyal companion is Tornado. But here's the twist. Tornado is not a human, but a black, intelligent stallion who understands and jumps in for Zorro's narrow escape with only a simple gesture or whistle. Legend has it that Tornado is so fast and agile that no other horse can catch him. So, once Zorro mounts his saddle, he vanishes into thin air within a few seconds, making them an unbeatable duo. However, over the decades, Tornado's stature has only increased, as he's not only seen as a horse with a strong build, but also a trusted ally who always goes above and beyond to save his friend from danger, thus carving out his own legacy. Another unknown fact about Tornado is that, despite being depicted as a black stallion in most adaptations, other breeds, such as the Andalusian and Frisian, have also featured as Tornado in some adaptations, as these breeds of horse are highly energetic and active, and not to mention they also have a strikingly beautiful appearance, and they're intelligent to boot. Number 15. Macaulay's string of Zorro stories. Following the enormous success of The Mark of Zorro, a huge demand for Zorro stories emerged. To fulfill this, in 1922, Macaulay began a new series of 60 Zorro stories in Argosy All-Story Weekly. Many of them were later collected and published as The Further Adventures of Zorro, Zorro Rides Again, and The Sign of Zorro. The readers eagerly followed each episode for its unique sword fights, secret tunnels, and daring rescues. Taking advantage of the character's rising popularity, Macaulay republished his 5-part prose series, The Curse of Capistrano, as a novel, entitled it The Mark of Zorro, through Grosset and Dunlap in 1924. The novel went on to sell 50 million copies and became one of the highest-selling books of all time. Macaulay continued writing stories until he died in 1958, making Zorro one of the longest-running pulp-action icons in American fiction. But you might be shocked to learn that these stories began to ran out. Some vanished into thin air, and some disappeared in old fragile magazines, gathering dust on publishers' and collectors' shelves. But in the 21st century, Zorro's adventures became widely accessible once more, all thanks to the modern publishing house Bold Venture Press, which took the onus of collecting and reprinting the original stories in comprehensive volumes very carefully. After many years, new generations of readers finally had the opportunity to experience the cult classic in its original form and to rediscover Zorro and his clever tricks, fearless duels, and sharp wit with a fresh perspective. Number 16. The Second Weapon of Zorro. Zorro is renowned for using his iconic rapier to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. However, many are unaware that Zorro also possesses another formidable and creative weapon in his arsenal. We're talking about his iconic bullwhip, which he flashes to disarm enemies by snapping their weapons right out of their hands. The whip adds unpredictability to Zorro's fighting style, as he uses it to trip horsemen and scale walls across rooftops in a true swashbuckling style, matching his clever image to outsmart his enemies with wit and quick thinking rather than brute strength. In some other stories and live-action adaptations, Zorro has been depicted as using the whip to snuff out candles with pinpoint accuracy, grab objects from a distance, and tie up unsuspecting foes with a charming smile. Here's another interesting tale that involves the bullwhip. Legend has it that in The Mask of Zorro, director Martin Campbell initially opposed the use of the famous bullwhip, but Sir Anthony Hopkins felt the whip was an integral part of Zorro's persona and should be used in the movie. So he practiced maneuvering the whip diligently and soon learned to manipulate it and got permission to use it in the film. Number 17. The musical genius behind the 1940s Mark of Zorro. In 1940, our beloved swashbuckling hero made a grand return to the big screen in The Mark of Zorro. However, there was a twist. Unlike the previous film, this new talkie version of the movie featured a brand new cast and crew. It was directed by Ruben Mamoulian and produced by Daryl F. Zanuck, with Tyrone Power portraying the role of Zorro. However, when the movie was released under the 20th Century Fox banner, it was the musical theme that caught the attention of audiences. Alfred Newman, the legendary composer behind the stirring musical theme of the movie, perfectly captured the raw essence of Zorro's elegance, mystery, and a touch of playful mischief. Newman's soaring melodies and dramatic flourishes made audiences feel the rush of Zorro's resolve whenever he galloped on his black stallion to deliver justice and the thrill of a blade flashing in the moonlight. In earlier movies, Zorro was only popular with daring stunts and clever tricks, but Newman's music amplified Zorro's essence in all his thrilling duels and daring escapes, which became more epic. However, the biggest legacy of Newman's score was that its impact lasted far beyond its original release, as many future music composers of Zorro, from television series to movies and even parodies, drew inspiration from Newman's score to create their own pieces. Number 18. The masterstroke of Disney. You already know that Disney started a television series about Zorro which aired in 1957 and starred Guy Williams as the charismatic masked hero. However, many of you might not know that this show was highly rated and popular with viewers who waited week after week with their families for each episode to drop. Enjoying Williams, dressed in a black mask and cape, as he carved justice through California nights with a flick of his rapier. Disney wanted to cash in on this popularity and turn Zorro into a full-blown pop culture icon. How did they do it? Unlike today, Disney didn't have the virality of social media, the services of OTT platforms, and most importantly, a strong network of PR teams to constantly maintain rapport with the audience. Disney launched Zorro-themed merchandise, including lunchboxes, plastic swords, costumes, puzzles, coloring books, and even Zorro-branded guitars. They also introduced comic books featuring the new adventures of Zorro, and boom, the sign of Zorro was everywhere, from bedroom walls to playgrounds. This move soon became a masterstroke for Disney, as they successfully made kids imagine themselves as the masked hero, defending innocence and thus deepening the bond between Zorro and his audience more than before. Disney's success with the merchandise launch also laid the foundation for the media giants on how to create an empire with simple branded products. The last episode of the television series was aired on the 24th of September, 1959. Number 19. The return of Fairbanks in Zorro. After the roaring success of 1920's The Mark of Zorro, fans were eager to witness Fairbanks as Zorro on the big screen again, and they weren't disappointed. Fairbanks soon returned as Zorro on the big screen in the sequel titled Don Q, Son of Zorro. But here's a little twist. In this movie, Fairbanks not only reprised his role as Don Diego de la Vega, but he also acted as his son, Cesar de la Vega, who later became Don Q. The movie revolved around the young Don Q who traveled to Spain, fell in love, was falsely accused of murder, and found himself in a pot of trouble. Will Don Q be able to use his wit, skill, and daring swordplay, like his father, to overcome all his troubles, or will his enemies get the upper hand? That's the basic premise of the plot, and honestly, it's a solid one. However, the movie had another off-screen twist. Unlike the previous film, it wasn't directly based on Johnston McCulley's story. Instead, writers drew inspiration from the novel Don Q, written by the mother-son duo Kate Pritchard and Hesketh Pritchard. Therefore, you will not find McCulley's credits in the movie. Regardless, Don Q, Son of Zorro, continued the swashbuckling tradition of Zorro, even with a new and unexpected storyline. Number 20. Silent Swords to Streaming Screens. The real evolution of Zorro's unmasked journey. You might be surprised to learn that after leaping off of pages in 1919, Zorro has appeared in more than 40 films and 10 television series. You already know that it began in 1920 with Douglas Fairbanks' portrayal of Zorro in The Mark of Zorro, and later in its sequel in 1925, Don Q, Son of Zorro, which kept the legacy of the hero alive. In the 1930s, thrilling serials like Zorro Rides Again and Zorro's Fighting Legion made every Saturday afternoon an adventure for every viewer. Then, in 1940, came Tyrone Power with his version of The Mark of Zorro, and he turned the character into a Hollywood icon. In the 1950s and 60s, the tale of Zorro made inroads into Italian, Mexican, and Spanish productions, with notable releases including Mark of Zorro, El Zorro Escarlata, and The Shadow of Zorro, among others. In 1974, The Masked Fox carved a new mark in television history with The Mark of Zorro, a made-for-TV movie starring Frank Langella as Zorro. The movie reimagined the 1940 classic for a newer set of viewers, but the biggest highlight of that film was that, for the first time, Americans would watch the swordplay and clever disguises of their favorite action hero, not in theaters, but from the comfort of their couches. Then, you already know about Antonio Banderas' portrayal of Zorro in 1998's The Mask of Zorro and in 2005's The Legend of Zorro. On television, we've already discussed Disney's iconic series from 1957 to 59 starring Guy Williams. However, apart from these, the important key series have been the animated adventures, such as Zorro Generation Z, and popular dramatic telenovelas like El Zorro, La Espada y la Rosa. If we're talking about current scenarios, then Zorro, a Spanish action-adventure television series, dropped on Prime Video in 2024 in Latin America and the US, starring Miguel Bernardo as Zorro. Even though Zorro's tale has been narrated through different styles, actors, and settings, one thing has remained the same. They all tried to keep the legend of Zorro fresh and relevant with each passing generation. Number 21. The Talking and Colorful Zorro. In our previous fact, we didn't mention the movie The Bold Caballero because it requires more special attention than the rest mentioned before. Why is that? Because with The Bold Caballero, the Zorro universe took a monumental leap in cinematic history. Yeah guys, The Bold Caballero, released in 1936 and starring Robert Livingston as the masked vigilante, was the first talkie film in the Zorro universe. However, the story doesn't end there. The Bold Caballero was also the first movie where the audience witnessed Zorro's true colors, by which we mean it was also the first movie in the franchise to be made in color. This double upgrade in a single movie added a whole new dimension to the legend of Zorro and gave fans something that was completely out of the box, surpassing their imagination. Upon release, fans heard their hero's voice and witnessed his deep black mask and cape against the sunlit Californian backdrop. It was the first time, and fans were awestruck and mesmerized. Even though the movie's plot revolved around the same old romance, justice, and action, the advanced audio systems and visual spectacle placed The Bold Caballero as a very important film in the universe and paved the way for later generations to experience Zorro in a richer, more dynamic way. Number 22. The Musical. After establishing itself as a legend in novels, cinema, and television shows, the tale of Zorro found another medium to entertain fans, and that medium was theatrical musicals. In 2008, Zorro, the musical, premiered in London's vibrant West End, marking the masked hero's grand entry into the magical world of musical theater. But there was a catch. This musical premiere wasn't just a retelling of old Zorro stories. Instead, the creative team crafted a fresh storyline inspired by the source material, blending it with romance, daring stunts, and rebellion for an unforgettable theatrical experience. But the biggest highlight of their show was the fiery score by the legendary Gypsy Kings, who, with their flamenco guitar and passionate rhythm, perfectly captured Zorro's true Spanish Californio spirit. The musical brought audiences face to face with the world of Zorro, which they had never experienced before, even in adaptations. There were beautiful and well-choreographed live sword fights, pounding guitar beats, and dancers gracefully swirling capes like blades. The critics loved the presentation and praised the energy, spectacle, and inventive staging of the entire lore, as the narrative perfectly blended with the raw, earthy pulse of flamenco. Number 23. The Humorous Zorro. In 1981, The Legend of Zorro took an unexpected yet hilariously flamboyant turn with the release of Zorro, the Gay Blade. The movie was a parody of our beloved masked hero and starred the ever-charming George Hamilton in the lead role. If we're talking about the plot, the movie revolves around Ramon, the long-lost gay brother of Don Diego, who takes the mantle to protect the town from evil and injustice when Diego gets injured, and both roles were played by George Hamilton. When Ramon dons the black mask and cape, he calls himself Bunny Wigglesworth. But Bunny has a colorful twist to the character. He fights injustice with equal parts swordplay, sass, and a wardrobe of dazzling rainbow-colored outfits. Not only that, his dramatic entrances in purple and gold capes, coupled with impeccable fencing, were some of this movie's highlights, which made the audience chuckle, laugh, and have a great time. Even with the lighthearted comedy, the film kept the essence of Zorro intact by standing against oppression with a humorous take. Zorro, the Gay Blade, might not follow Macaulay's original material, and it hasn't aged very well, but it did become a fan favorite for its witty script, playful performances, and the childlike joy of watching a hero save the day in style, proving that sometimes even the most loyal fans can take a joke on their favorite hero of all time and leave theaters with a cheerful smile. Number 24. No second sequel. You'll be amazed to learn that after The Legend of Zorro, there were plans for its sequel, but the idea was dropped as the movie performed poorly at the box office. However, director Robert Rodriguez, who was initially roped in to direct The Mask of Zorro in 1996 but pulled himself out of the project due to budget issues, approached Sony to produce a Zorro reboot, reimagining the masked vigilante in a post-apocalyptic setting. This version was rumored to be titled Zorro Reborn. The thought process behind this radical idea was to showcase that Zorro could adapt to any era even a doomed future where evil and injustice were at their peak, and he would stand as a symbol of hope. But Sony was more interested in making a new Zorro movie to explore the origins of Don Diego de la Vega, especially in how he became Zorro. They wanted the project to have a dark, gritty, and intense tone, similar to 2008's Dark Knight. Ironically, after all this time, Batman ended up inspiring a Zorro movie. Regardless, as a result of creative differences, the project never saw the light of day. But still, there's a belief that the masked hero will reinvent itself for the newer generations, just like it did for the previous decades. Number 25. Changes in the title. Following the success of The Mask of Zorro, the makers quickly engaged themselves to prepare for a sequel, but you'll be shocked to learn that the sequel was not initially titled The Legend of Zorro. The story of how they reached the final title was as dramatic as one of Zorro's midnight rides. It started as the simple and direct The Mask of Zorro 2 to maintain the branding continuity from the first film, but then, drawing inspiration from the early scripts by screenwriters Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, the makers pivoted to Zorro Unmasked as the title because they felt the story would hint at the shocking reveal of Zorro's secret identity, and the audience would flock to the theaters in curiosity. When the script was set aside, the sequel floated under the straightforward name of Zorro 2 and later got changed to The Return of Zorro to evoke a classic Hollywood sequel feel. Finally, Sony settled on the name The Legend of Zorro to capture the essence of the hero's legendary past, and it remained fixed, appearing on posters and screens worldwide. Number 26. Television Magic. This might come as a shock to the millions who have watched and enjoyed Zorro galloping into his hidden cave in Disney's television series. His perfectly concealed hideout was nothing but a work of television magic and a testament to how creative filmmakers can be. The show's triangular-shaped entrance wasn't a real cave, but rather a natural lean formed by massive fallen rock slabs located at the historic Iverson Movie Ranch in California, which had previously been featured in many Western adventure series. But in Zorro, it became an unforgettable piece of the legend. Number 27. Spanish and Latin actors of Zorro. It's a common belief and repeated trivia that Antonio Banderas is the first Spanish and Latino actor to portray the role of Zorro, but it's not actually true. Before him, Spanish actor Jose Suarez played the role of Zorro in the 1953 film La Montana Sin Ley. He was then followed by another Spanish actor, Carlos Quincy, who took up the sword and cape in the late 1960s and early 70s in films like La Última Aventura del Zorro, Zorro el Caballero de la Vendetta, and El Zorro de Monterrey. Just like that, Banderas was not even the first Latino to play Zorro. Before him, other popular Latino actors such as Rafael Bertrand played Zorro in 1964, followed by Rodolfo Dianda in 1976, and then Henry Darrow, who portrayed an older, wiser Zorro in the 1980s TV series Zorro and Son. But this doesn't change the fact that Banderas' portrayal made Zorro an international blockbuster and turned the movie into an all-time classic. Number 28. The costume differences. You might be surprised to learn that in The Mask of Zorro, not only were the fighting personalities of Sir Anthony Hopkins and Antonio Banderas different, but even their costumes were different as well. No, it wasn't a mistake, but a creative decision taken by award-winning costume designer Graciela Mazan. Mazan designed sleek, elegant lines with refined embroidery to reflect the elder Zorro's Spanish heritage. On the other hand, she gave Antonio clothes that were rugged and had an earthly vibrance to showcase his character's Mexican roots. Number 29. Picking history for the location. Earlier, most of the Zorro movies were shot in Los Angeles. However, for The Mask of Zorro, the makers resorted to shooting the film in the historic town of Monterrey. However, this wasn't done solely for visual appeal. Monterrey was the actual capital of Alta California during the Spanish and Mexican periods, which is the exact setting of the movie. The makers wanted to shoot Zorro in a location that reshaped California's destiny, as they sought to make the film look rooted in history and make Zorro's fight against tyranny and oppression appear realistic. Number 30. The global supremacy of Zorro. No doubt, over the decades, Hollywood has produced timeless classics and a multitude of iconic characters, who have etched their legacy on the big screen, making inroads in the hearts of audiences, fans, and movie lovers forever. But none can match the global supremacy of Zorro. Sounds a bit controversial, right? But we have our reasons. First of all, Zorro has been portrayed by actors from Mexico, Spain, Italy, France, the United States, and different parts of the world, which proves the legend of the masked fox knows only the language of courage, wit, and rebellion. Secondly, the tales of Zorro have crossed linguistic and cultural barriers, as his adventures have been translated into nearly 26 languages, spanning from Latin America to Asia and reaching Europe. According to our sources, almost 500 million people have already been exposed to Zorro's heroics through various media, including novels, films, comics, telenovelas, and television shows. All these show that Zorro's legacy wasn't restricted to being just a Californian folk hero. He became a timeless symbol of courage and patriotism, regardless of the language you speak. Marvelous conclusion! So, mi amigos, we've reached the end of our video about 30 insane facts that prove just how legendary Zorro truly is. But before we hang up our masks and swords, we've got a few questions for you. Which version of Zorro do you love the most and why? Do you see him more as a playful trickster fox or a fierce symbol of justice? And tell us which other iconic swashbuckling hero or masked legend we should unmask next. We're always looking for ideas for new videos. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and remember, stay sharp, stay sly, and keep the legend alive.